something one thing that we've tried to do at Startup Grind is not romanticize startups, because we're not trying to inspire people to be startups. We're trying to inspire entrepreneurs to stay entrepreneurs. And, a lot of people.
Chad, welcome to Unleashed, the podcast, and I'm so happy to have you. What have you been up to? You said you've been traveling quite a bit. Tell us about your travels. Let's start there.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I think it's exciting what you're doing. It sounds like you've had a lot of people on and getting some momentum going. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been like a lot of great people. I think I'm blessed to be surrounded by great people in my life, and that's why I wanted to have them on this podcast and kind of share them with the world. And because I always have these great conversations, I was like, why don't I put it and show it to others rather than telling them about it? So that's where this idea came about.
As a longtime lover of podcasts, I like this idea a lot. So
oh, cool. I'm glad. That's actually great validation. Thank you for sharing.
As far as the last little bit, it's funny that you asked that, and we were kind of joking about this before.
Yeah.
Is it's kind of like, what have you been up to in the year that everything changed? So like everything seems to have changed. I guess for me, the main focus has been my company. We in March of 2020 merged with another company. So my company is a software company. It was called Sunexo Solutions. And we had a software that was used. It was basically a regulatory specific CRM. So it was used by major projects, infrastructure, energy, resource development, to track all of their engagement with impacted parties, Indigenous communities, landowners, municipalities, whoever's been impacted by it, and then demonstrate to the regulator that, yes, we did adequately consult or we didn't, depending on what the data shows. And so we merged with a company that was doing a lot of the services on it. So we were able to kind of give a more holistic solution to our customers. But it was a great timing because, March 2020, I'm sure you all remember what was going on. So, we didn't do a big announcement because we were trying to figure out, is Rome burning? That's on the work side. And then on the other side, continue to run Startup Grind Calgary. Harder to do events. We did a few virtual events, but I think we've really found our, biggest differentiator are really good live events. So we've done pretty minimal over the last year there. And then last summer, I took over as a director for a group called the Founder Institute, which is the world and Canada's, and soon to be Western Canada's, largest pre-seed accelerator. So I became a director for their Western Canada group. So,
oh, congratulations! That's awesome. Good for you.
Yeah, it's exciting because it aligns with a lot of what I've always been passionate about entrepreneurship, being an entrepreneur myself, but also, I feel like coming from Alberta, there's always been that kind of entrepreneurial culture that's there. And so it's great to be able to tie that in. And with there's so many innovative ideas out there for multiple sectors. And I like, it's great to be part of that, and Western Canada. We work from anywhere, startups anywhere from BC to Manitoba, and that includes the territories too. So
that's awesome. So there's a lot of questions that I have there. One of it, I think, highlighting is a lot of people don't know how much entrepreneurship and how many startups, how many great stories come out of Alberta. I think it's kind of like there's a lot of hidden gems. A friend of mine, Tristram, who's actually one of the partners in my company, Unleashed Ventures, he wrote something we call the Alberta paper, and he interviewed all these amazing founders from Alberta. There's a lot of stories, a lot of hidden stories, and one of the topics was, why do Google and Apple kind of go to Alberta to acquire a lot of these companies, and which many times we don't hear about them. And I think in Canada in general, I don't know if you agree with this sentiment, is we're not very good at telling our story and telling the world how much greatness and how many great entrepreneurs and startups exist in Canada in general, not to mention BC and Alberta.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, I often feel Canadians, we sometimes have a culture that doesn't celebrate success. That, you know, everyone likes a little bit, but don't get too big. And then, you know, we don't want to talk about that. Your ego is getting too big. And yet that's definitely a challenge when you're trying to, celebrate, what's happening.
Yeah.
And Alberta specifically, it's funny, it would have been about 4 years ago when I became the director for Startup Grind Calgary. I remember I had a an interview for my volunteer position, and they said, we really like what you did, but are there many startups in Calgary? And I was just like, okay, this is why you need a chapter and you need me working for this organization, because there's so many great stories to tell. And you look at the history of Alberta, it is, almost traditionally, it's always been the highest per capita entrepreneurship rates. But also one thing it's been very successful at is scaling those. You look at the entire oil sands industry, the energy sector, what's really unique about them is they're not like in a lot of Canada when big companies are former, monopolies or crown corps that are privatized. These were companies that grew from nothing to some of the largest energy companies in the world. And I think that, seeing that same approach with technology, that's where you see the huge potential there in Alberta.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Like there is so much value, so much creativity. When I was coming to Canada, one of the most surprising things for me is the kind of startups that are here. Like I came here, I didn't know Hootsuite was a Canadian company, and the reason I mention Hootsuite, it's nothing for nothing other than Hootsuite was one of the companies that I used extensively, like one of the softwares that I used extensively, because I had a social media company in Dubai. So I knew Ryan. I knew about Ryan Holmes. I didn't know Ryan Holmes, but I knew a lot about Ryan Holmes. I knew a lot about from his writings. I knew about Hootsuite. But to me, it was like, this is an American company. This is not a Canadian company. Like, I never thought this is a Canadian company. So when I came here, just kind of a fun story. Um, I think 4 months or 6 months after I was in Vancouver, I see this ad. It's like, oh, Hootsuite is hiring. I'm like, oh, Hootsuite has an office in Vancouver. Oh, Hootsuite is based in Vancouver. Like this is the kind. Just discovering that. It's like, how did I not know? And to your point is that we don't kind of really get into sharing and talking a lot about what we do and how much success there is. I think it's changing right now, just because of the amount of deals that are being signed and recently have been massive. Tell me about the deal that you had. So when you said your software that you merged, can you tell me a little bit about the story of your company and what was the merge like, and especially at the early times of COVID? Like that would be fascinating. Very
Well,
interesting.
I mean, for us, everything was decided upon before COVID before COVID was even a word. I think at the time it was the Wuhan virus, everyone was calling it. So before COVID, the term even came out, was when we'd agreed on everything. And then I'd actually been in Los Angeles for all of February for a mixture of mostly work, but a little bit of pleasure. And then I came back, and the idea was then you'll start the new role in this new organization. And instead, we come back and the offices are all empty, and we're going, okay, like, how do we make this work? And we said, you know what, let's just focus on internally getting everything alignment, because when you have two companies combined, there's always challenges, be it cultural, be it just even technical. Like
Yeah, that's challenging on its own. Not to mention that now everybody has to work remotely somehow.
And in some ways, that benefited us. Sunexo was already we'd always embraced a remote work environment, so it wasn't really an issue for us at all. So as we kind of came in, it was like, all right, I mean, work at home, we already do that a couple days a week, so
Oh, that's cool.
not an issue. I think probably the one thing that was a challenge is, and you see this everywhere, is a lot of people are under tremendous stress about what's occurring. And my business partner has a great line. He goes, people are wobbly. They're wobbly right now. And so I think there were sometimes some discussions that got heated that, escalated faster because one, who knows the stressful environment someone's at home in. And you combine that with, you can't just sit down and talk to someone. You can't just walk over to the office. And I'm a believer that like the further you're separated from someone, the more unprofessional people can be. You know, if I'm standing in your face, I'm not going to be like, you know, F you, I agree with this. But now you're on Zoom, now you're on phone, now you're on email. And you combine those two. And I think that that was one challenge we had to overcome, was a bit of that area where there was probably some disagreements that got heated a little bit quicker than needed to be. But, you know, we've come out of it pretty strong. You know, the combined entity, you know, being profitable and actually in a really good position to grow. We actually just hired a few people more to help with it. So in some ways it was perfect timing, because as organizations were contracting, we were able to present, you know, what I call it business as a service. So as opposed to software as a service, we're saying we can take care of the whole business, the software, the people, the processes, all of that we already have established in a center of excellence. And so you can just give that to us and we'll scale and contract as your projects occur. And so that's why I'd say in some ways it was a good timing for that.
Interesting.
And just the robustness of bringing a service and a software company together, you know, a service, sorry to cut you off there.
No, that's good. Go ahead.
I'll just say, you know, a software company, it's hard to get your foot in the door as a software, especially with a lot of our clientele, which are large companies. As I said, energy, infrastructure, resource development. But when you do, you're kind of sticky. Like you've got your foot in the door, your software is, you know, there's been a lot of drive to get you in the door. They're going to make sure you work. Now the service side though is a lot easier to get in, and people are like, no problem, help us do some services. So it kind of works symbiotically, where, you know, if we get the services to help us get in, the software will help us stay there. And if the software is there, we can upgrade with the services. So that's an interesting thing with the merger too.
Sounds very interesting. One of the things I wanted to ask is, which startup is this on your journey as an entrepreneur? Like, have you built other startups before, and how did you get started on this entrepreneurship journey?
This is the first one.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I kind of feel like some of the departments or organizations I've been involved with for startups, but obviously they're not. This was the first one. At the time, I was working in a new department for this called stakeholder information management, where we were doing the services. And myself, my two business partners at the time came together and we were like, there's got to be a better solution out there. Now, we went and launched, this is also now almost 10 years ago, Boom Time Alberta. So, I mean, you know, it's no problem to make some, you know, we were thinking that 3 years out, we're going to retire and be done with this. Ended up being a lot longer, but, you know, I think we ended up being very, you know, it's very hard to survive this long. And so I was quite happy, especially going through the turbulence where originally we were focused just in Alberta, just oil and gas, being able to expand in these other industries. So
that's good. That's good. Yeah. So, and you said how many years have you kind of proceeded together?
So it's just about a little over 9 years now. So almost 10 years.
That's good.
So,
that's good.
Yeah.
Good for you. So, and you got involved into, what got you to be involved in the startup ecosystem? You know, extended yourself and say, you know what, I'll help with the startup grind. You know, I'll help. And now you're saying also
Founders
the
Institute.
Founder Institute, which I know it requires a lot of work. So from some of my friends who lead it. So why would you extend yourself and participate in the community? What's the driving factor?
There's probably a few different ones. So one, I mean, I've always been just passionate in general about trying to make a better community around me. And I believe in showing leadership in that area and giving back. So that's one factor. Two is, I mean, in some ways it's a hobby, right? Like it's something I like to do. It's fun. I enjoy doing it outside of it. You know, I like to play hockey, work out, and host startup grind events. And so there's that element. And then once you get, and there's also the fact that, you know, if we look at startup grind, I didn't feel like the market had anything like that at the time. There was nothing that I, as an entrepreneur who, you know, I'm not a college student needing to get inspired to do a startup. I'm an entrepreneur that's had some success. I want to go to events to meet other entrepreneurs in town, and I want it to be a bit of more of a premier event. And that wasn't there at the time. And so I did that. And then a lot of just turned into momentum. It ended up being a lot of fun. And I met some great people, including yourself. And that's what kept me interested. I mean, it also helps probably being single and not having kids that I have more time on my hand, but
Interesting. So it's kind of entrepreneurial kind of spirit where you didn't find something that you needed and you wanted to have it in the community, so you went ahead and created it, which is very entrepreneurial. And I always recommend to entrepreneurs to listen. You have to create your community. Sometimes you can't wait for the community for somebody else to create it. You have to be kind of creating it. What was some of the challenges that you faced while kind of building a community, or what was easy and what was hard, let's say?
Hmm. Um, so one of the things that surprised me on how hard it is there's a lot of talk about collaboration, but there's a lot of organizations out there where, they don't have what I call like, they see it as there's a pie, you got to cut up the pie and that's it. And I've always been someone who thinks like, no, you grow the pie. That's what you do when you have new people come in. And so I remember, I think it was after our second event, and I think within 2 to 3 events, we were starting to get some success with Startup Grind. And I should mention, just for background, Startup Grind is one of the top. Calgary is one of the top chapters in the world for Startup Grind. So out of over 400 chapters around the world, we're considered one of the top ones. But when we started to get some momentum, I remember specifically, I had someone take me out to lunch and basically like, Chad, it's kind of cool what you're doing, but we've already got this handled with some other groups.
Really?
And I just remember being like, I'm literally just volunteering my time to try and like contribute to the community. And that was the kind of message. And I definitely noticed some of that. And, there's different mindsets there. And, my view is we're going to do our thing. And I'm not going to worry about how to fit into other people's view of what the ecosystem is. We're going to create what we think is needed and go from there. And, it's frankly the same as my company, how we approached is, I think I'm not too worried about the competitors. I'm focused on, do I feel like we're delivering something that our customers are enjoying? And that was really the focus. And, do we have a model that makes sense? Yes, I want to make sure it's a differentiator in the market, but if I'm worried all about like, where do I fit in this? That's that minimal mindset of there is a finite pie and we're just cutting it up. And that's probably one of my core beliefs is that, the ability for self-improvement and everything, you focus on what is the art of the possible, not what is there right now. So.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating when you say that. I've faced that a little bit as well when talking about the community. Like there are people who are awesome, who would give their time, who would say, "What can I do to help?"
Yeah.
And there are people who say, "Well, you know what? Like we have already done that. Why you're doing something else?" Well, obviously because somebody needs it. Like, and it's a different thing. We have something in Syria. I grew up in Damascus, Syria, and one of the things is. Um, we have the gold souk, where everyone who sells gold want to kind of go to the gold souk and have a store there. And you would think that you do not want to be around your competition. So when you ask them like, why do you want to open next to your competitor? Wouldn't they take away all your customers? And the answer is, well, when there's a gold souk, it will attract more people to it. It's kind of like what you're saying,
Yeah.
growing the pie, right? Because if there's one store, it's hard to attract more people to it because it's one store. Whereas if there's like a gold souk, everybody who's interested in buying gold, they will go to the gold souk. And then you get traffic from everybody else's traffic. So
it's a great analogy. And I've been to a gold souk in Dubai.
oh yeah, that's all.
They're
Which one did you go to? The
I don't.
heritage
This
one?
is a long time ago, but I
Okay.
remember it was like 3 stories high and is like a block long, just as much.
Yeah.
Incredible amount of gold. So
yeah.
I mean, and then to be fair, you raised a good point before. I mean, I also met a lot of people who were like, "How can I help?" And so I'm not at all trying to say it's all negative, but if I was looking at one of the things that was a surprise to overcome was that area. But I also met a lot of people that were super excited to help and help grow that. So
yeah. And what would you say in your having built a company in Alberta, in Calgary, Alberta, what would you say is the best thing about building a company there from your point of view? Obviously, I mean, you didn't build it everywhere, but you traveled quite a bit. What do you say that helped you in the community to build the company? What are you thankful for on your journey?
So I'd probably put it into three ways, and I think it just is in general what is unique about Alberta, but Calgary specifically.
Hmm.
So first of all, let's talk about the non-sexy stuff. The taxes are the best in Canada. And at the end of the day, that matters. And so the taxes are very competitive there. Number two, Calgary is a really affordable, nice city. For a 1 million person city, the infrastructure is unbeatable. I just talked about just come back from LA, or if you go to Vancouver, $1 million home, that's a very average home you're going to get. If you have $1 million home in Calgary, that's a really nice one. And so that quality of life, especially as you're an entrepreneur and getting going, is very high in Calgary. And then the third I'd say is cultural. There is really something cultural about Alberta and Calgary. When I first came to Calgary, I came from originally outside Edmonton. It was fascinating working because nobody was from Calgary, and everyone had come to Calgary for one reason: to make a difference for themselves, to improve themselves, for work. So everyone was interested in helping each other, networking. Everyone loves talking about business. Everyone loves talking about how to make money. And so that type of culture, I think, the combination of that culture, the infrastructure, and the taxes make it a really good place to start a company. And frankly, in some ways, scale it too, because one of the problems I think Canada has is we often fund other countries' innovation, because we do a lot of support for startups, and then as a company gets bigger, we just start taxing the hell out of them, and then they just get bought and moved somewhere else. Partly because of taxes, partly because they go to bigger ecosystems. Obviously, you got 380 million people in the States. That's a bigger market to serve. But the taxes really do matter too, and being able to support that. So I look at, Alberta is that tax thing really starts to matter as you start making money. Yes, if you're not profitable, it's not a big difference. But as you get profitable, it definitely becomes more attractive in that sense. And not just from the corporate perspective, but also the individual perspective. The ability for individuals to, keep more of their earnings, which is really important for entrepreneurs because we don't have a pension plan. So every dollar we make, you want to keep it, because at the end of the day, your pension is hopefully being able to sell the company. But if you're not able to sell the company, you want to keep as much of the money as you can. So those are the three areas I think that benefit.
Interesting. Almost sounds like we need to consider that entrepreneurship journey is a bit different than, let's say, if you are let's say employed, or you have and I agree with you when it comes to an entrepreneur, we really don't have like a plan. And I think there are some companies that are trying to help entrepreneurs plan for that, but that's not what we think. We think I think I'm going to work forever kind of thing. Not because I have to, but because I love to. It's like what I do and the ideas that I pursue define me as a person. So I'm not thinking,
There's
well, when do I retire and how do I build for my retirement? So that's actually like not even occurring in my mind, but I have to prepare for that for my family and stuff. So it's hard kind of to, I think
It
for
is,
me,
and
match
frankly,
that
especially
mentality.
the first few years of my company, you're even like being in relationships.
Yeah.
You're trying to relate to someone who's maybe got a corporate job, has a steady thing, says, okay, next step is buy a house. And I'm like, buy a house? Like, I just took out a mortgage on my company. Like, what are you talking about? And so that's a challenge. That's the thing. And there was a person I interviewed, and I feel so bad. I can't remember his name right now. One of the early Startup Grind interviews. And he had 3 exits. And all of them, like, they were, good exits, but they're not like retiring Cancun exits
Yeah.
either. And I remember him saying, he's like, if you think about financial planning for an entrepreneur, is the first year you're going to be losing money. You probably put money into the company. The second year, hopefully you're breaking even. And then you have about 2 to 3 years where hopefully you're making some money and getting ready to sell. And if you don't sell your company, it sucks, because the first 2 years you've taken a hit. Now you can expand that to however many years it is. but you're taking a deficit personally in those first few years. So it's really important to think about how to sell it. And frankly, you talk about not having a plan. I mean, that's one thing I would have redone is I wish there had been the founder institute for me when I came in, because having someone, the experience of just saying, there's not 100% formula on how to succeed, but there is a bit of a formula on if you figured out the market, how to like be as successful as possible. Yes, you as the entrepreneur have to figure out, I'm a big believer the entrepreneur is responsible for figuring out, make a product and can you sell it? But there's a lot of other things that, you waste a lot of time in the first couple of years. Be it, I need to create a logo, I need to figure out how to set up payroll, what am I doing bookkeeping? If you have an organization to kind of support figuring out those best practices, I think that would have helped me a lot. I'm going to really quickly pause because I think I'm getting weird lighting.
Yeah, let's do that.
The sun's setting.
Sun is good for.
All right, that's better.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point that how do you navigate not just your go ahead.
Sorry. The sun is moving.
Yeah, better. So I think it's a very interesting point to I think what I'm hearing in you're saying is that it's not just starting a company, it's like how do you navigate your way to success, and how do you make success really meaningful for you as an entrepreneur, like impactful? Because you're right, at a certain point, a lot of times there's a lot you putting into the company. Like, what is it? The founder of Airbnb, they sold cereal the first few years just to make ends meet. Like you have to do, and they maxed out their credit cards. I've been in that situation many times. Hopefully my wife is not listening right now, because she will remind me. She will like, yeah, you spent all our money. So there are some times when you're pursuing an idea and there's an approach, and sometimes when you don't know enough, or you have that kind of misguided hope, because you don't know what's going to come out. Like it's not like in 2 months, once you get that agreement or once you get that breakthrough, everything's going to be like, you just get that breakthrough, but then there's a lot of challenges along the way. It's not like that's the be on and end all. Like it's an ongoing thing.
And sometimes if you don't have the infrastructure in place and you have that breakthrough, it actually can be detrimental. That happened to us actually early on, where we had basically we started kind of, for lack, maybe self-critical, offering everything to everyone. And we got a bunch of bites because of that, but we didn't have the capacity to meet that. And frankly, we got into a bit of a pickle we had to crawl ourselves out of, where we had a couple of years of really quick success. Then we had challenges from that success. We almost had to like reorientate ourselves to be a bit more focused there. So
yeah, thanks for mentioning that. A lot of times it's not talked about, right? And then there's also the pressure, the mental pressure of having to carry a company, right? You, like every person you have, right, as the leader of the company, everybody's relying on you. You have to kind of arrange pay, you raise funding. Have you raised funding for your startup? Like, is that something you engaged in as well?
yes, but just private.
Okay.
Private we raised.
Yeah, these are all these things that you have to take care of, and nobody talks about the weight that weighs in on you. It's not like you can come back home and say, okay, I finished my job, I can relax, put my feet up, and I don't have to worry about anything until I start tomorrow at 9. It's like, this is always functioning. How was it for you, and how did you deal with that?
So yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of stress and pressure, especially when times are going bad, when there's challenges that are there. Because at the end of the day, you have a bad employee, employment standards, they're always going to take the employee's side. You don't meet your revenue targets, the investors are looking at you, they're not upset at the employee. There's a lot of factor, it's stressful, because usually, certainly for myself, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs, you're heavily financially invested in it too. So the ability to succeed is important. And I think early on, I made probably one of the biggest mistakes is And I had someone tell me this at the time, but I was too arrogant to appreciate what he was saying. I was too accepting of sacrifice. I was okay with sacrificing too much to make things happen. So I'm fine making no money. I'm fine trying to we just got to push this through. We got to make sure we got the budget for these other things. And he said to me, he's like, Chad, like, that's unacceptable. You better find a way to make the revenue because you shouldn't be taking a pay cut on this thing. And, you know, I think that sometimes there's that mythology out of Silicon Valley that, you know, a startup just means two guys working in a garage and one day you're Apple. But that's rare. I mean, the startups, if you look at average successful startups, the founders are often in their 40s. They're people that have experience that are coming with a plan. And I think I probably bit too much into that former idea. And as a result, I think probably a couple of years we lost, you know, I probably lost because I was sacrificing too much. And one of the things that helped the company is when I was like, okay, this is unacceptable. How are we getting out of here? And there was a specific, I was accepted into a fellowship program in Washington, D.C. I remember it. I'd just lost our biggest client. And I think I was, you know, vacillating on what to do. And I went down there and said, okay, what would we do? And during this fellowship program, in the nighttime, kind of wrote a white paper about what I would change. And I went to my two business partners. And, you know, I got very lucky there that I had great business partners, people that were very ethical, good people. And they supported that transition. And now we're in a much, you know, obviously we're able to merge and turn ourselves around. But that was a lesson for myself that I would push out to people is, yes, it's extremely hard, but don't become comfortable with it being hard. Because sometimes people mistake being stressed out with being productive. You know, I'm doing so much for my company, I'm so stressed out. Okay, but what are you actually producing? Because and I'm not trying to be rude, but it's easier to suffer than to roll up the sleeves and get things done sometimes. And then we mistake that suffering as being productive. And so that was a lesson I certainly learned early on.
That is so true. I'm also thankful for having like great partners. I think that's so underestimated of how important, because you can't do everything. Not only you can't do everything, a lot of times you don't see your own kind of the things that you don't do in like well, or you're doing wrong, and having somebody who likes you enough and actually cares about you enough to tell you where you're basically fucking up things. And I have partners that told me, because I got used to this. I don't have time, I have more important things, I don't have time. And then suddenly my partner would stop me and she said, listen, like, we have to do these stuff, and if you don't do them, like, yeah, you don't have time, but that we're not getting anything done. Like, we're not getting, yeah, you're busy, but there's no, just like in what you're saying, there's no productivity. And shifting even my language of how I say things and what I'm giving myself permission to changed the trajectory of how we do things.
That's huge, because I mean, it's so easy to find problems in an idea, because there's literally no idea that doesn't have problems. And so it's really easy to shut down a creative session by just poking problems in it. But sometimes you got to let an idea come out. You need to let it kind of get some air, and everyone kind of throws some idea. Just let's see where we're going with this. And yes, that original idea might have a lot of fundamental problems, but as we kind of work it through, it gets better. And I know my one business partner, Ian in particular, was really good at like driving us towards like, stop taking the air out of these ideas. Like, we need time to work our way through this and figure it out. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
How did you find your business partners?
Well, the one was working with, we had a shared client together. So we were working together on a large project together. And then he had hired the technical guy, Ian, for another project. And so the three of us kind of connected along that way. Two things I'll just throw out on partners is, I'm going to go back to that Silicon Valley myth, because I think that there's some myths that get people in trouble. And one of them is, you got to be best friends just eating pizza and drinking pop together all the time. My two business partners, I've been out for a beer with maybe once a year. we're not friends outside of work. I mean, that being said, and I should say, Ian, my business partner, who the two of us were the ones who ended up merging with the new company. I trust him probably almost as much as anyone. Like, because I've been through it with him and I trust him so much. I know he's a good ethical person and I have so much respect for him. Flip side, last year or 2 years ago was the first time I met his kids over 8 years. So, we weren't friends in that kind of way. And I think that's okay. Sometimes it's okay to have like that professional type of relationship in that way, because we were able to have some tough discussions then, and it's not as personal. Yes, it's personal, it's our company, but it's not like everything's tied together. So I think that's one positive. And the second thing I'll just say about founders, in my experience, is because at Founder Institute, we often get asked, like, how do you find a good partner? And how do you know they're going to be good? And, someone may have a better answer than me, but my experience looking at others is you get lucky. Because at the end of the day, you don't know if someone is going to be good till you start working with them. It's like hiring someone. You can do every test in the world to try and bring someone on board. But at the end of the day, until you start working with them, you're not going to have a full idea if they're going to be a good fit for the team. And it doubles so for partners. So it's, just one of the many risks an entrepreneur has to take is in their partners. So
I always say that it's very interesting, because I always say that we will work to know how that we're going to work together. Let's work together. It's kind of like I relate it to sports, where I can't decide to go like play a championship team with you unless we shoot some balls. Like, we have to play together to learn how we're going to play together. It's hard, because obviously we try to kind of hedge for all kind of things that going to happen or going to go wrong before we do things. But no matter how much we try it with contracts, with having our checklists, you really don't know a person, especially in an environment of work, unless you actually work with them and experience them for a while.
My approach to that has always been on onboarding, and this is probably not a popular one, but I'm all about, we're hiring professionals. So even if someone's earlier in the career, we need someone who's got some professional traits. And so my view is very much hire quick and fire quick. And that just means give someone enough rope that they either pull themselves up or they hang themselves. And I think for me, that's been the most effective way. The interviews and everything else, at the end of the day, it's like, okay, just start working. Let's see how we're going together. And hey, at the end of the day, if it's not working out 2 days in, 3 days in, let's part ways in that kind of area. And I think that's, for me, what I found success in.
That's super cool. That's my daughter. So what do you want? See them underneath the desk. Family has to come in.
Yeah. Say hi.
Did you find them? Yeah. Okay, good. No, can you ask mom, please? I'm doing a podcast. I think one of the things that's fascinating. I want to move into right now, where now you're actually leading the Founder Institute. First of all, have you had any cohorts in Founder Institute?
Yeah, we're doing our second one. Well, the second one with me right now.
Oh, cool. So, what have you seen? Or, I mean, first of all, what is your approach to attracting entrepreneurs and kind of convincing them to go on a program to kind of learn? The reason I ask you is entrepreneurs are not known to be the best people who would, say, "Oh, I want to learn." They just want to jump in and do things. So, is it just a perception from my side, or do you kind of, what have you seen when you're dealing with entrepreneurs, and what have worked and what did not work in getting them to be part of the program?
I mean, the basic pitch I would give them is, first of all, I'll give my own story. I wish I'd had that, at the beginning. But, a lot of people we're having are often in the founders. So first of all, one thing that differentiates us a bit is we charge money. And some accelerators don't charge money. And I just really disagree with that, because I'll give you an example. I won't take clients on for free, because if they take me on for free, they've got no skin in the game. So they're just less likely to succeed. So we're saying it's not much, $1,000 for 14 weeks is a lot cheaper than remortgaging your house because your software is not, or your company's not working out and you have to pay your payroll. And so take this time to really figure out, is this something you want to do? And a lot of what we have found with people is, yes, we get like someone who I'd say is, just a straight up entrepreneur. That's what they're going into. But there's also a lot of people we find who have existing jobs and they just want to see, is this something that I want to leave my job, or am I willing to take the risk? And I'm saying, instead of leaving your job, take this 14-week course. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a lot of work to do those two things. You know, it's also a challenge, running a company. So take the challenge, figure out, is this something I really want to invest into? And you see the results in the data. So what do they say? Like only 30% of companies are around after 5 years.
Yeah.
But with the Founder Institute, looking at the global data of this program that's been refined over a decade and has had literally thousands of startups go through it. If a company finishes with the Founder Institute, 70% of them are around in 5 years. And that's a huge accomplishment there, as you know, like how hard it is for startups to exist after that.
Yeah.
So that's what I usually tell them is like, take this chance to really find out, is this something you want to commit to full time? And like I said, I mean, if I could have done it again, I think it would have benefited me a lot to have done that. So.
And for you, having interviewed a lot of entrepreneurs with Startup Grind and having them there, have interacted with a lot, being a community, one of the community activators and leaders in Calgary, what have been like the most inspiring, let's say, story or things that you learned about, the entrepreneurship spirit or from entrepreneurs?
That's a great question. I mean, there's been a lot of really inspirational people I've interviewed. What's some specific stories or just some specific?
Just any learnings that you don't have, maybe you don't remember the story, but anything that stuck out for you is like, hey, this is actually very, very interesting, or learning that you held on to.
One thing we've tried to do at Startup Grind is not romanticize startups, because we're not trying to inspire people to be startups. We're trying to inspire entrepreneurs to stay entrepreneurs. And, a lot of the people we interview, I encourage them to talk about their scar tissue. And I say, look, everyone knows you're successful. That's why you're on this stage. And yes, we're going to talk about your success. But the people in the audience that can't relate to that, what they can relate to is that moment when you woke up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night and said, oh my God, have I just ruined my life doing this? And once again, I'm just having some major issues remembering names today. It's the end of the day, so my bad. But I remember one of the most successful entrepreneurs we'd had on sold his company for over $2 billion.
Wow.
I remember I asked him, I said, when you sold your company, what's the first thing you went out and bought? Like, did you go buy a car? Did you go? And he said, first thing I bought, I paid off my debt. I had 2 mortgages. And it was just like that kind of reactions, like that's so real. And I just connected so much with that. So
yeah. That's fascinating, because we have this vision of, somehow, I mean, even a lot of people don't know that when you sell your company, it's not like, let's say you sold the company for $100 million. It's not like the $100 million goes to you. Like, there's so many things that it goes to, and there are the investors. There's so much that goes into it that sometimes they don't know what the entrepreneurs actually get. And it's like, suddenly they think of the entrepreneurs like, oh, this entrepreneur is now like mega rich. I mean, unless you're like, very rarely do you have like Plenty of Fish, which is the entrepreneur, had kept kind of full ownership almost of his company, which is very, very rare.
Yeah,
it's highly unlikely that you got a large portion of the money. And
there's a lot of them have been made a lot of money, but until they had that sale, they were, their company might have been making a lot of money, but they weren't. They're servicing their debt. They're, you know, yes, you're making X amount on your paycheck, but you're also servicing all the debt you took along the way to get there. And so, yeah, it's not, yes, if someone succeeds, I think when they're younger and has maybe, I don't want to say easier, well, I would just will say easier success, you know, might be, um, uh, it's a different style. I mean, if you, almost everyone we've interviewed has been on it, had a lot of scar tissue on it. And so when they had that success, it was a huge, you know, weight off of them.
So then the question is, why do it? Like, why not, you know, especially for some of them who are quite professional, they can probably settle in a C-suite, you know, job where things are handled for them in a way. Why do it? In your opinion, and what you've seen, and maybe your own motivation, why do you wake up every day and do this?
So I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, and myself included, is because you have a hard time working for people. And you're going, I don't want to be told when I can start working, what I have to do. And I don't want to rate that memo about what I'm up to. I want to do it myself. And so, I mean, honestly, I think a bit of that there. For me, honestly, it's been an incredibly rewarding journey being an entrepreneur. Taking that responsibility on, I've learned so much about myself. I've learned so much about what matters to me, and, you know, being such a better judge of people. And I like that flexibility up, and I like that responsibility of saying, I've got to figure some way out to do this. And I'll be frank, one of the key things I learned is it's not all but when I need to figure it out, it means I need to work with other people to figure out how to make this work. And to me, that's been a very rewarding journey. And I think when you meet most entrepreneurs, there's something about they wanted to do it on their own. They want to do it their way. And yeah, that's probably a skill I'd see a lot of, or a trait I'd see a lot of.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think what I like about your answers is that how real they are as well. Like, it's like it is very real that a lot of times we just see a different way, right? As entrepreneurs, like, I don't want to do it the way it's been done. What is, I have a mug, it's like, what is it? We've always done it this way. That's the wrong answer, basically. It's like, you want to do it a different way. You think there's a better way. It can enhance not only things for you, but for everyone around you. And you want to create impact as well for the people around you. What is your wish? Probably want to finish on this. What is your wish for the Calgary ecosystem? Because now you're with Startup Grind, obviously, with Founders Institute, with your own startup. And I would imagine a lot of entrepreneurs probably meet with you, look up to you, and maybe you mentor a few. What is your wish for the ecosystem in Calgary, and maybe a bigger wish for Canada in general for the startup ecosystem?
I'd probably say there's a couple. One, and I'd say this is a broader Canada thing, but it's still a bit in Alberta, is celebrate success. You know, we really want to, in anything, be it sports, be it academia, be it business, is celebrate people, be proud of people being successful. Someone being successful is not an indictment on you. Don't compare yourself to that person. Celebrate their success. And when I look at some of the maybe specific things to Alberta, but I'd say broader too, is understand how small we are. You know, it's easy when you live in a city and you just see that city, you create this myth of like, we're so important. I spend a lot of time in LA. LA County has 10 million people. That's the population of Western Canada. You think about what's in 10 million people, like how much like potential and opportunity and money. And at the end of the day, yes, we want to focus on growing and making our local community strong, but we need to understand that we're part of a global world. And we don't want to be afraid of embracing that bigger opportunity that's out there. In fact, we want to encourage you. And, you know, one of the Alex Galt, a friend of mine who's also a mentor at Founder Institute, he always has this great graph he starts off with them when he's presenting. And he goes, here's a picture of the US, and every one of these US states, here's what country has the same GDP as them. So when you think about like what you're doing, don't focus on how am I going to take over Calgary or Alberta, even Western Canada. You need to be thinking bigger than that, because someone will scale out otherwise on that. And then the third thing I just say is very specific to Alberta is it's not a finite pie. And often what I see in Alberta is, well, you're either tech or you're energy. And these two are different. And that's a crazy concept. I mean, you hear it a lot. We need to transition out of energy. We need to transition into tech. And I don't believe that at all. I'm like, we want to build off of it. We want to grow the pie. I want to have a really strong, vibrant energy sector. And I want to have a really strong technology sector. And I go back to, what is tech? Like, tech just means you found an innovative way to incorporate technology to a proven process. It doesn't mean it's industry agnostic. So let's celebrate, just growing that pie, as opposed to saying there has to be one area we're focused on growing. It's, you have a great idea, we're going to create an environment that you can grow it. And then we'll let in some ways, the customers, in this case, the taxpayers, decide what's the best option. If I've got a good idea on biomed and I'm in Vancouver and I can go with it, create an environment that they can succeed. And so those are kind of the big three wish lists. And maybe as I'm going on my soapbox, I'll throw one more out there.
Yeah, go for it.
And the last one is stop picking winners and losers, because there's a lot of money coming out from the government right now. And I think that's great. We need help at this time. But a lot of it is being either purposefully or not purposefully politically motivated, and who's getting the money and who's not. We want this type of company to succeed. We don't want this type of company to succeed. And at the end of the day, that's not what builds successful companies. Successful companies is they figured out what the value was they're delivering, and people paid for that value. And so I just say in general, I hope we start focusing more on how do we create an environment or an ecosystem that entrepreneurs can succeed in, as opposed to picking and choosing which companies we want to help grow. And so those are kind of the big four I'd have.
The last point you hit on something that is really, really like deep for me, because when I actually was invited to Alberta Innovate, and they had kind of they brought the regional network innovation network, so RINS. They invited them to, and I was speaking, and my first slide said, "Bet on everyone." Basically, so it's exactly what you're saying, is that stop picking winners and losers. Create an environment where we have so many entrepreneurs, so many ideas. Create an environment where all of them have the opportunity to thrive, and that way you get more. Because where you get great companies come from great entrepreneurs who actually build a lot of startups. You have to create an environment where there's more of them to come in, more of them choose that path, and you'll get that.
And think about sustainability.
Yeah.
Like, if you bribe someone to stay here, they'll stay as long as you keep bribing them. But as soon as you stop, they're going to go to somewhere else where it is. But if I've grown up in this community and I've got kids here and I've got a vested interest in the community, well, I'm going to help keep my company here. I mean, yes, maybe at some point leave, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you want people to have a vested interest in your community beyond just, and I know the bribe's probably kind of harsh, but I don't think it's too harsh for some examples that are out there. So
yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I think, creating that environment where it's rich with entrepreneurship, rich with talent, how that will invite others, will invite investment, will invite companies to come in because of the environment that you enriched. And there are plenty of examples around the world that created that, where countries that don't even have anything close to what Canada has, but because they focused on enriching the environment, they attracted those companies, they attracted investment. And I completely agree with that. Chad, this is an awesome conversation. Thank you very much for taking the time and sharing authentically, and some great nuggets of information there. Really glad that we got a chance to have our conversation after many times of trying. Thank you for being patient, and thank you for being here.
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much for doing this. This is an important part of contributing to the community, because I love it when anyone's trying to give back and share information and help people out. Thank you for doing this. So.